Thank you for joining us for our Ignite Startup Workshop. My name is Amanda Golden, and I am the Assistant Director of the Herb Kelleher Entrepreneurship Center. The Herb Kelleher Entrepreneurship Center promotes the development of entrepreneurial skills and supports the exploration of the ways these skills can be applied to careers as founders or innovators within established firms. Our Ignite Startup Workshops provide an opportunity for attendees to learn more about different topics related to new venture creation. These workshops host leaders from various industries and on-campus experts and enable students, faculty, staff, and the greater Austin entrepreneurial community to gain usable skills and insights for launching an idea into a startup or pursuing other career opportunities. Today, we are excited to welcome Robert Prentice to provide an overview of the common ethical dilemmas faced by entrepreneurs in the startup process, a topic that is very timely with lots of news stories about different startups that have gotten caught up in some ethical problems. Robert has taught business law and business ethics at the Texas McCombs School of Business at UT Austin for over 40 years. He is the Ed and Molly Smith Professor of Business Law and the Faculty Director of the Ethics Unwrapped video series and educational program in the Center for Leadership and Ethics. At the end of his presentation, Robert will be taking questions, and you can use the Q&A box along your Zoom toolbar to submit those questions for Robert. Robert, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Amanda. I appreciate it very much. I am very happy to have the opportunity to speak to you folks today. Start off with a little quotation. Entrepreneurship is fundamentally a moral enterprise. Of course, I think pretty much everything in life is fundamentally a moral enterprise, and we should all get that through our little heads. But there certainly are issues that come up in the area of entrepreneurship that we need to deal with. While it's so important to have ethics in entrepreneurship, you've probably heard of Theranos and Uber and WeWork. I was reading an article, I think it was in the New Yorker, late last night, so it's a little unclear in my head, but it had to do with companies that are using robots to cure people's loneliness, including their, of course, sexual loneliness, and certainly there are going to be some issues there. The ones I'm going to talk about are going to be a little more mundane than that. But Theranos, Uber, and WeWork, you got to admit, sort of interesting stuff. Maybe you've read Bad Blood. If you haven't, you should. All about Theranos. That's a really, really good book. Or maybe you've watched The Dropout on Hulu. I just finished it like 2 nights ago. That's, again, it's horrifying is what it is. It's just horrifying. And then there's Super Pumped, The Battle for Uber. I finished that a couple weeks ago. Also a horrifying book. Haven't gotten around to watching Super Pumped yet on Showtime, but it's on my list of things that I want to do. And then, of course, there's WeWork. I've read The Cult of We. I've read another book on that, and I'd like to see both the dramatization, We Crashed, and the documentaries that are out, including WeWork. Haven't gotten that done yet, but again, on my list of things to do. Certainly there are ethical issues in entrepreneurship these days, no doubt about it. Got a nice HBR article here. Excuse me 1 second. I'm kind of blocked by my, there we go. 2021 Harvard Business Review article says, the Holmes case, Elizabeth Holmes, of course, from Theranos, is rare. Few entrepreneurs face criminal fraud charges. Well, she's not only faced criminal fraud charges, he has now been convicted and could go to jail for a long time. But the article goes on to say lesser indiscretions are common, including obfuscation, lies of omission, exaggeration, embellishment, evasion, bluffs, and half-truths, and they come at a cost. Deception results in market inefficiencies. It locks up resources by prolonging the lives of doomed ventures and making it difficult for VCs and employees to know where best to invest their money or labor. $700 million and the lives of a lot of workers were tied up in Theranos for a long time, and that was incredibly inefficient allocation of resources. The authors go on to say, we believe it also takes a personal toll on founders, given the debilitating stress that often accompanies lying. And again, if you have happened to watch The Dropout about Elizabeth Holmes, if it's anywhere close to accurate, you can tell that Elizabeth Holmes did suffer some distress from all the lying that she had to do. So it's definitely a good time to pay a little attention to ethics in the entrepreneurship realm, which is what I'm here to do. Since I was given this little assignment, I've done quite a bit of research, a lot of reading in entrepreneurial ethics, and I will tell you the research is kind of all over the map. Some researchers believe that entrepreneurs tend to have aggressive and egotistical personalities that translate into ethical missteps. I think that kind of fit in naturally with a lot of stereotypes we have of entrepreneurs who are just kind of gung-ho sorts of people and believe 100% of themselves and can sometimes get a little bit carried away. And you saw that in WeWork and Theranos and Uber. But there's also evidence that most entrepreneurs, certainly there are exceptions, but most entrepreneurs have higher moral standards than regular managers and are better able to put their stamp on the moral culture of their firms because they are the founder that everyone looks up to, and they have more luck getting people to go along with them, especially if they're doing the right thing, than people who work in like big corporations. For myself, having read the research that I've read, I believe the most common ethical dilemmas that face entrepreneurs are not meaningfully different than the most common ethical dilemmas that face larger, more established firms and their managers. And that's important to me, it seems. So among the common ethical dilemmas for entrepreneurs are, is it okay to fake it until I make it? Well, that's not just entrepreneurs. This is also a temptation for established firms. Established firms that are aggressive, like Enron, which, believe me, spent years faking it until it made it, or as it happens, didn't make it. Or firms that are in distress, as Lehman Brothers, whose collapse kind of started the whole 2001 collapse. Second type of dilemma for entrepreneurs. Is it okay to ask for forgiveness rather than for permission? And of course, you know that has been Uber's motto. It was certainly when they started. They went into lots of markets where the service that they offered was illegal unless they were registered, and they didn't want to register. They just wanted to go in, start offering rides, become really popular, and then when the regulators tried to crack down on them, bring in all their happy customers to lobby against the regulation. It worked in some areas, it didn't work in others, but it was definitely asking for forgiveness rather than permission. But they're not the only ones to do this. A lot of established companies have tried this approach as well. Certainly Enron did. Their auditor, Arthur Anderson, let him get away with a whole bunch of stuff that they shouldn't have. SAC Capital, one of the most successful hedge funds in history, was just engaged in insider trading all the time without SEC permission. Another issue facing entrepreneurs, is it okay to lie in order to save the company? May I tell a potential investor or employee or customer that the company is doing much better than it is if that investor or employee or customer, if we can get them on board, might be able to actually enable us to achieve success? So entrepreneurs have asked this many times. Here's an investor. They've got the money that can save the company. If they knew what's going on, they're not going to invest. But if I can convince them things are going way better, they'll give us the money and then we actually can succeed. Or it might be a key customer, somebody who can make that first big purchase of your product, can get you over the hump. Or the key employee who can come in and right the ship. But again, examples of stuff like this. Again, I've read a lot of articles on entrepreneurship ethics in the last month. Examples we've seen where people kind of went off the rails were telling the Small Business Administration, falsely, hey, a bank is willing to give us a loan if only you'll extend support. Well, the SBA extended the support without investigating, where they would have learned there wasn't any bank willing to give a loan based on that. Another company sent copies of its publication to a store in Miami and then to a store in Los Angeles, and then advertised that its readership is nationwide. Small exaggeration. Another company invented customer testimonials. Another company created a Potemkin village of fake offices to make it look like they really had employees and stuff going on when they really didn't. We've seen stuff like that. But are those meaningfully different than what we've seen from large established companies? Volkswagen represented that its diesel engines met pollution standards when they didn't. All they'd done is create a software fix that could fool the EPA's testing devices. Boeing said our 737 MAX jets are safe, even without pilot training. And of course, 2 of those fell to earth, killing hundreds of people. Not so true. Enron said for years how hugely profitable they were. Not so much. Lehman Brothers, our balance sheet is solid when it was a complete mess. I think the lies told by the entrepreneurs, very similar to the lies told by these established companies. And the temptations that are presented to both types of companies every day are very similar. So ultimately, it seems to me that the ethical dilemma that faces all entrepreneurs is this one. How do I live up to my own moral standards while helping my firm succeed? Of course, you want your firm to succeed. You want your company to work. You want your product to be out there. But you don't want to sell your soul in order to do that. You don't want to end up in jail. You don't want to disgrace yourself and your family, as Elizabeth Holmes did. So, how do you avoid that? That's really going to be my topic today. And the answer is to be aware of and guard against the psychological factors that can lead good people to do bad things. Because I'm confident that you believe you're a good person and want to be a good person and probably are a good person. But if you've been paying attention, you know there are a lot of good people out there who've messed up big time, and we'd all like to avoid that if we could. And I'm going to go into several of these psychological factors that lead good people to do bad things, but going in, keep a couple things in mind that I think do make it harder to stay on the straight and narrow for entrepreneurs than for people who manage big companies. One factor that makes it harder is just the smaller size. It leads to more vulnerability and more pressure. An article in HBR said the unique challenges found in entrepreneurial ventures can be traced to the newness and smallness of these firms. Compared with larger, more established businesses, entrepreneurial firms are more vulnerable to environmental forces, especially given the limited cash reserves and debt capacity of such organizations. Their frequent overdependence on a limited product service line and their tendency to rely on a niche customer base, these characteristics often result in conditions that encourage or justify ethical compromises. To have a problem for a big company often means a bad quarter. Nobody wants to have a bad quarter, of course. But for an entrepreneur, it can mean the end of the company. And that's the reason why there's more vulnerability and therefore more pressure to do the wrong thing. The second factor is that larger, older companies are more likely to have in place codes of ethics, ethics training, control systems, documentation requirements, and the like that minimize legal and ethical risks. They've got the money to hire lawyers, to hire compliance officers to try to make sure things are done the right way. Uber ultimately had to replace Travis Kalanick in order to put standard corporate governance and control procedures in place because he didn't want anybody looking over his shoulder. He didn't want to have to answer to anybody, and he wouldn't spend money on that. And that cost Uber a lot of money in the long run. So those are two situations where entrepreneurs face more pressure and more problems than established companies. So let me introduce you to just a bit of behavioral ethics, the study of the psychology of moral decision making. This is kind of my field and what I'm interested in, and I'm only going to give you the smallest taste of it this morning, or I guess this afternoon, but I think it's interesting. And one thing I want to talk about is something called the overconfidence bias, which is the tendency that we all have in various circumstances to be overconfident regarding our skills and abilities. Generally speaking, people are overly confident in a wide range of situations, and there is evidence that many entrepreneurs are especially overconfident and therefore vulnerable to the overconfidence bias. Professors Langevort and Sale are two law professors who do work in this area. They've done the research, and they say a specialized body of research exists about entrepreneurial psychology, suggesting that startup founders have greater than normal tendencies towards self-efficacy, self-assurance, autonomy, power, and independence. They don't like to be told what to do. And Elizabeth Holmes, Travis Kalanick, Adam Newman are all classic examples of people who have that overconfidence. Adam Newman was quoted once upon a time as saying something along the lines of, he wanted to be God, or maybe thought he was already. People are not only overconfident regarding their abilities to drive and to audit and do other things, they're overconfident regarding their morals as well in general. 80% of people say they're more ethical than their peers, their competitors, and their coworkers. 92% of Americans in a survey said they were satisfied with their moral character. In a recent study, 50% of business leaders put themselves in the top 10% ethics-wise. Mathematically speaking, that doesn't really work very well. But the worry we have here is that if you just know that you're more ethical than the people around you, and if you are confident in your moral character, you may go through life just assuming, hey, if I run into ethical challenges, I'll get them right. because I'm good people, certainly better than the folks around me. And that may lead you to make decisions without thought, without care, without getting advice from other people, without being sufficiently reflective, and you can end up goofing up, not meaning to. Doing the wrong thing without meaning to. Overconfidence can bite everybody, including entrepreneurs. Stephen Garfinkel was the CFO of a substantial company. He was also in jail when he was interviewed and said this: "What we all think is, when the big moral challenge comes, I will rise to the occasion." There's not actually that many of us that will actually rise to the occasion. I didn't realize I would be a felon. He thought he was a good person. He was confident he was a good person. And he had committed felonies before it kind of dawned on him, whoops, I kind of screwed up. No one, including entrepreneurs, should be overly confident regarding their own morality, because you can mess up not meaning to if you do that. Let me talk about something called role morality. Think about this. This is a study done at the Wharton Business School. Professor there brought in like 1,000 people and asked them this question. Basically, he said, hey, ABC drug company's most profitable drug, its internal studies indicate, causes 14 to 22 unnecessary deaths a year. Competitors offer a safe medication with the same benefits at the same price. If regulators knew of the internal study, they would ban sale of the drug. Question is it ethical for ABC to continue to sell the drug? Well, 1,000 people or so who were given this scenario said, and I hope you agree, yes, that would be unethical. You're killing people who don't need to be killed. You should stop selling the drug. But then the Professor Wharton did something interesting. He brought in about another 1,000 people, and he divided up into groups, 57 different groups. And he said, you are on the board of directors of ABC Company, and you just got a report, and here's what the report says right here, this information. What are you going to do? Well, now all of a sudden, we're playing a different role. We are not judging someone else's actions. We're trying to decide what we should do as directors of a corporation where we have a fiduciary responsibility to make money on behalf of the shareholders. And after debating this amongst themselves, the members of those 57 groups, well, all 57 groups voted to keep selling the drug. And 80% of them said, and if somebody tries to stop us, we'll hire lawyers, we'll hire accountants so we can keep selling the drug. They were playing a different role and they made a different judgment, and I think they made a poor judgment there. So I think it's not the thing that you want to do. Professor Keith Levitt is at Oregon State University. He studies this stuff, and he says when people switch hats, they often switch moral compasses. He found that workers who tend to have dual roles in their jobs would change their moral judgments based on what they thought was expected of them at the moment. I like this quotation. People like to think they are inherently moral creatures. You either have character or you don't. But our studies show that the same person may make a completely different decision based on what hat they may be wearing at the time without even realizing it. Here's an example, a study that came back pretty recently. When engineers were asked whether U.S. firms should engage in gifting to gain a foothold in a new market, even if it would violate federal law, in other words, should you pay a bribe which would violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act? If they were working primarily as engineers, only 13% said yes, 87% said no. But if they'd been promoted, if they were working primarily as managers, where their responsibility is more making money for the company, 80% said, yeah, violate federal law, pay the bribe to get the business. They're playing a different role. They're making a different decision. So you have to worry about the roles that you are playing. It seems to me that entrepreneurs may view themselves as playing the role of company saviors who can't afford to live up to their personal moral compass. They say to themselves, well, hey, I don't want to do something that's crooked. I don't want to tell this lie or commit this fraud, but everybody's counting on me. I'm the big boss around here. I brought in the investors. I brought in the employees, and they're counting on me. I've got to do this thing, even though I know it's wrong. I don't have any choice. I think a lot of entrepreneurs get in trouble that way. A third thing I want to talk about is the conformity bias. And to give you just a little bit of a break for me, I'm going to play you a little video. There we go. You may know that I'm part of Ethics Unwrapped, which is an educational and video series we have here at McCombs in the Center for Leadership and Ethics. We've got like 140 ethics videos that we've made absolutely free. You can watch them on YouTube. You can watch them on our website, ethicsunwrapped.utexas.edu. Here's a little one about the conformity bias.
Conformity bias. The conformity bias is the tendency people have to behave like those around them rather than using their own personal judgment. People seem to be more comfortable mimicking others, even regarding ethical matters. For example, studies show that people are more likely to act in a pro-social manner, such as contributing to charity or conserving water, if they see or hear that others are doing it too. Knowing that those around us are making an ethical choice indicates it's the social norm and makes it easier for us to follow suit. Unfortunately, the flip side is also true. As psychologist Dan Ariely notes, cheating is contagious. When we see others succeed by cheating, it makes us more likely to cheat as well. Indeed, the conformity bias can cause people to simply follow the herd, rather than use their own independent ethical judgment.
That's the conformity bias. One of my favorite examples involves the Petrified Forest, a place I finally got to last year. Great place, I recommend it. They had a problem. People didn't really want to pay for souvenirs at the gift shop. And so when nobody was looking, they would bend over and pick up a piece of petrified wood and slip it in their pocket and walk out the gate. Folks who ran the Petrified Forest wanted to do something about this, and so they put up a sign. Your heritage is being stolen. 14 tons of rock a year are disappearing, mostly by visitors pilfering of small amounts. The effect of putting up this sign was that pilfering tripled. Because if everybody else is doing it, it doesn't seem so bad. If you're out on the highway and everybody's speeding, you know you're more likely to speed. If you're downtown looking for a parking place and everybody's double parking, you know you're more likely to double park. That's the conformity bias in action. I think of the Volkswagen scandal. In the book I read about that, they reported people in the conference room were aware that they were taking a big risk in creating this fraudulent software that was going to fool the EPA test devices. There was an intense debate about whether to deploy the software. Some of those present felt like cheating was simply wrong. Among them were idealists who truly believed they were working to build a cleaner engine. The idea of cheating was demoralizing to them. It was not what they signed up for. But others argued, all the car makers cheat. So if all the car makers are cheating, nothing really wrong with us cheating, is there? You know there's a widespread perception that entrepreneurs exaggerate. They fake it until they make it. They otherwise play fast and loose with the truth. Well, if all the other entrepreneurs are doing it, this can make it seem like an okay thing to do. Elizabeth Holmes found out it's not an okay thing to do. She's going to go to jail for it. You want to be careful about that one as well. Studies show business owners are influenced significantly by the community in which their firms operate. If you hang around with other entrepreneurs that do fake it until they make it, that do fudge the numbers, it's going to be hard for you not to do that. But you must avoid that temptation. I want to talk quickly about the tangible and the abstract. The general notion that we are affected more by things that are tangible to us, that are close to us. They might be in the same room with us, rather than a county away, a state away, a nation away. And they might be happening right now, and not a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. Those things are more abstract, and they don't have as big an impact on our brain, but that can cause us to kind of mess up. The example that I often think about is the Ford Pinto. Back in the 1970s, early on, we had these three big American car companies, and they made big American cars. Terrible gas mileage, looked ugly, they were horrible. And we were getting killed because Japanese car companies started importing little compact cars that were cute and got great gas mileage. So all the American car companies, oh my God, we've got to get compacts out there on the road. And Ford sunk all of its money and all of its prestige and all of its effort into the Pinto. They had one problem. Every time they did a standard rear-end collision safety test, the Pinto failed. You're sitting at a stop sign, somebody comes up behind you a little bit too fast, hits your back bumper. But with the Pinto, what happened was the back bumper indented, pierced the gas tank, pushed gasoline up into the passenger compartment. And if there was a source of ignition, like somebody smoking, which they did all the time back then, or the engine's still on, big explosion. Well, when it was time to think about that, well, the people who are going to be burned and killed, those are just actuarial numbers at this point. There are no names, there are no faces. You can kind of tell yourself, well, maybe those rare collisions won't happen. But the impact of saying, got to pull the plug, we can't put this out there, is a huge black eye for your company that you love. Stock price is going to plummet. Everybody around you is probably going to be laid off. That has more impact than the notion that, off in the future, somebody might get killed driving this car. So they put it out on the market, and it turned out to be like a $2 or $3 billion mistake. Studies show that auditors easily identify with their clients and may unduly discount potential injury to temporarily distant victims. They see their clients every day. They want their clients to succeed because they get a little prestige when their client does well. Hey, I audit an ABC company, and they're just doing awesome. And when you're letting ABC company fudge the numbers, you kind of tell yourself, well, okay, they might get caught and the stock price might drop, but that might never happen. You don't know the names and the faces of the investors who are going to lose money. Again, they are off there in the future. And heck, they ought to have diversified portfolios anyway. So it's easy to convince yourself that it's okay to let your client pull a fast one because of the tangible and the abstract. Noreen Harrington was a whistleblower at Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs was doing some fraudulent stuff called late trading and market timing. She explained that prior to blowing the whistle on these practices, she viewed them as part of a nameless, faceless business. And this business is how you look at it. You don't look at it with a face. But that view changed when her older sister asked her for advice on her 401k account. Her sister, one of the hardest workers she knew, was worried the losses she saw in her retirement account would prevent her from retiring. Suddenly, Harrington thought about this from a different vantage point. I saw one face, my sister's face. And then I saw the faces of everyone whose only asset was a 401k. At that point, I felt the need to try and make the regulators look into these abuses. Consider the entrepreneur. Maybe you've got a product that isn't safe, but you're desperate to get it out on the market so you can start generating some revenue. Maybe you are fudging the numbers a little bit because you look around the room, people you see every day, you think about, oh gosh, mom and dad, they loaned me the money to get this company started. They're going to get killed if the company collapses. All my friends that I went to college with, I got them away from their good jobs with other companies to come and join me on this quest to get our company going. I've got all my relatives who've invested money in the company, loaned money to the company. What's going to happen to them? It's much easier to view them as being, again, tangible. And you're more worried about them than you are the impact that you might have on people you haven't met yet, who may use your defective product when it gets on the market. So entrepreneurs definitely need to worry about the tangible and the abstract. Loss aversion is another little concept. The idea here is if you go to Las Vegas and you gamble and you win $1,000, you feel great. Everybody likes to win $1,000. But if you lose $1,000, well, then you actually feel twice as bad as the joy you got from winning $1,000. Losses have a bigger impact on us than profits. And part of what that means is we are more likely to take risks, including ethical missteps, to avoid losses than to get gains in the first place. My favorite example is Dave Bliss, who was a basketball coach at several universities, but he was at Baylor when he had a little problem. One of his players murdered one of his other players. That's not good. It got worse when police investigators found a whole bunch of cash in the apartment of the murdered player. Now, the reason that cash was there was that Baylor was illegally paying the guy to play at Baylor. And so Dave Bliss had to figure out a story for that. And so he brought his assistant coaches together and said, here's the story we're going to tell. We're going to say he had that cash because he's a drug dealer. That's why. Well, think about that for just a second. A mother has just lost her son. The son was murdered. And now we're going to tell her falsely, oh yeah, and he was a drug dealer too. That's pretty low down. And I don't think Dave Bliss would have done that to get the basketball coaching job in the first place. But to keep that job, he was willing to do something that's scurrilous. That's loss aversion in action. A 2021 HBR article said failure can mean, this is for entrepreneurs, not just missing an enormous windfall, but also letting down the friends, family, employees, and investors. With stakes that high, it can be tempting to bend the truth. So that tangible and the abstract, coupled with loss aversion, can make it really tempting to fudge the numbers when you're on, things are risky. A Journal of Business Ethics article said entrepreneurs want to succeed. The last thing they want to do is fail. Consequently, they'll try to avoid failure by virtually all means open to them. sometimes illegal means. Nevertheless, it may be confronted with a crisis situation where the life of the company is at stake. In these situations, pressures from all sides are tremendous. Social pressures from the workers and their unions, pressures from suppliers and their lawyers and bailiffs who want to be paid, financial pressures from banks. And all this is, in addition, pressures from the family. Commonly, the biggest fear is having to admit failure to friends, relatives, and to the community in which they live. Overnight, the privileged status of a successful business person is transformed into that of a loser. Without condoning, one can understand that even an honest entrepreneur, facing such difficulties and pressures alone, who can see a possible last resort solution to what is seen optimistically as a temporary problem, may be tempted to an ethically questionable expedient as the least worst option. I think of Elizabeth Holmes. When she left Standard and started a company, hey, look, she started a company. That's kind of cool. And then when it started succeeding, oh, wow, that's pretty amazing. When she said, I'm going to completely redo the health system in the United States with my one little drop of blood, wow, astonishing. And then all of a sudden people are investing like crazy and she is a self-made billionaire. That's pretty astonishing. And then she gets this award and that award. She's on the front page or on the cover of Forbes and on the cover of Fortune. And she just gets built up and built up and built up and built up. She's got such a reputation now. So many people admire her, so many people counting on her. How hard is it at that point to stand up and say, okay, all a lie, just been making it up? She found it nearly impossible. If she started telling the truth earlier, I think it would have been better. Let me talk about framing. How we decide certain questions has everything to do with what we have in our frame of reference at the time we make the choice. We want to make sure ethics is in that frame of reference, which is why I'm going to show you another little video.
Framing. A frame of reference, or point of view, refers to the way we look at a given situation. How a person views that situation can affect her understanding of the facts and influence how she determines right from wrong. Some frames minimize or even omit the ethical aspects of a decision. For example, studies show that if people are prompted to frame a situation only in terms of money or economic interests, they often leave out ethical considerations. In a famous study, a daycare center having difficulty with parents picking up their children on time started charging a fine for being late. Parents then reframed the issue from an ethical one, "It's not nice of me to burden the staff in this way," to a business one, "I can buy the staff's time by paying this fine." Late pickups increased rather than decreased due to this change in the parent's frame of reference. So, by remembering to consider the ethical implications of any situation, we can keep ethics in our frame of reference when making decisions.
Another example of framing is the Space Shuttle Challenger situation. In January of 1986, NASA was getting ready to launch the Challenger from Cape Canaveral, but they had a problem. A cold front had rolled into Florida. And so NASA contacted the engineers at Morton Thiokol who had designed the solid rocket boosters on the Challenger and said, hey, should we launch? And the engineers huddled and then said to NASA, no, shouldn't launch. We've never tested the solid rocket boosters in temperatures this cold. They got this O-ring thing made out of kind of this rubbery material, and in the cold, it could become brittle and fail. And that would be very bad. But NASA and some of their managers pushed back and said, well, hey, you got to remember, we've promised the American people we're going to be launching these shuttles on a regular schedule, and we're behind schedule. And bring this project in under budget, and we're over budget already. Those things just get worse if we postpone this launch. So, engineers, take off your engineer's hats, where your focus is safety, and put on your management hats, where your focus is dollars and cents. Well, that led to a change of opinion, and we launched the Space Shuttle Challenger. It didn't go well. Ethics would have demanded we focus on safety, but they got talking about dollars and cents, and that can get you in trouble. Think about Enron. How did it frame its goals? Well, I know it had everything to do with stock price. Their bonuses were tied to stock price. Their debt covenants were tied to stock price. You couldn't get on an elevator in the Enron office building and go from one floor to another without knowing what the stock price was, because they put stock tickers in the elevators. They want everybody thinking about stock price all the time, and ethics was nowhere in their frame of reference. And that is why Enron does not exist anymore. And that is why even entrepreneurs must keep ethics in their frame of reference all the time. That is your job. You'll regret it if you don't. Final point I want to talk about is incrementalism, the slippery slope. Gino and Bazerman, who teach this stuff at Harvard Business School, talk about the boiling frog syndrome. They say much unethical behavior occurs when people unconsciously lower the bar over time through small changes in ethicality. You're maybe an auditor and you've got 7 steps you're supposed to do in a process, but it's the end of the quarter and you're just about out of time and you're not going to meet your deadline unless you just kind of drop off number 7 and just pretend you did it. Just do the first 6, pretend number 7, and you do that, and nothing bad happens that quarter. And the 6 steps kind of become the new normal. So you do the 6 steps for a while, and then you're in a time crunch again, and then you drop off the 6th step, and now you only do 5. But again, nothing bad happens, and that becomes the new normal, and the bar just goes down and down. The next thing you know, you're in trouble. Robert J. Lifton wanted to know how physicians who were part of Hitler's, who had taken the Hippocratic Oath to preserve life, how could they become part of Hitler's death machine? So he went over to Germany and interviewed them. And you know, the Nazis did these terrible experiments on human beings, on Jews, and on the mentally challenged, and on gay people. And he asked him, how did this happen? And a common story he heard was, well, you know, they brought me in for a week and they just had me observe the procedures they were doing on these subjects. And the second week, well, at the end of the procedure, they had me sign a document documenting that the procedure had taken place. The third week, well, the doctor had forgotten one of his instruments, and I was asked to take in the instrument. And the fourth week, it was just my turn. One of them said, in the beginning, it was impossible. Afterward, it became almost routine. That's the only way to put it. When you start cutting corners, especially ethical corners, that can come and bite you in a big hurry. Enron CAO, Rick Causey, graduate of our #1 ranked accounting program, working for Enron, needed to do a deal to disguise a loss and disguise a delay in recording losses. He didn't want to record the losses. He thought up this transaction, and he talked to an executive about it who said, that's not proper accounting. We shouldn't do that. And then they had this conversation. Is it possible the deal's still alive? No. No chance of it coming back? No. Is there even a little bit of a chance of it coming back? The executive took the hint. The deal was declared undead, and the executive later said, you did it once, it smelled bad. You did it again, it didn't smell bad. That's incrementalism in action. It's easier to do the right thing 100% of the time than 97% of the time, because 97% becomes 94%, becomes 92%. In entrepreneurship.com, there was an article that said, in reality, most criminals in business, Elizabeth Holmes likely included, don't wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to architect a large fraud today. A scam doesn't come about in one single moment. Rather, its creation is more like a slow trail of breadcrumbs, the end result of many little, seemingly innocuous decisions made along the way. As Bad Blood tells it, this book you should all read, there was a moment early on when the team in Europe realized a demo of the technology wasn't working, but chose to pretend otherwise. This may have seemed a small part of the wider narrative, but that one decision to fudge the results created a precedent. The implication that it was acceptable to lie. And the second this type of thinking became institutionalized, it served as the foundation and thread across the business, which led to the whole disaster. As a business leader, you must realize the importance of each little decision you make along the way in the long haul of your company. So, Eugene Soltis, here on the left, wrote a book called Why They Do It. He's at Harvard Business School. He wanted to know why white-collar criminals who seem to be good people, why do they commit fraud? Why do they end up in jail? Ixion Su's an accounting professor at UNLV. She wanted to know the same thing. They both went into jails and interviewed white-collar criminals who were there and asked them, why are you here? Nobody said, today's the day I start my life of crime. I just got up one day and wanted to be a criminal. Nobody said, I think I'm in the wrong religion. Nobody said, I don't think I read enough philosophy in college. When they explained why they'd done what they'd done, it was the things I've talked about to you today. Overconfidence bias, incrementalism, a few others I didn't talk about because I didn't have time. And in fact, speaking of time, I think I'm done. I am just going to say character exists and it's very important, but it's not a stable fixture that enables a good person to always do good things when you face all these other pressures. And I'm going to stop so I can answer any questions anybody has, but I thank you for your time. Fire away.
So, Robert, this is so interesting. I can tell you, I watched the Hulu WeWork documentary. Very
How is it?
interesting.
Oh, all right,
Very
good.
interesting. It's very well done. I haven't watched We Crashed yet, but it is on my list, as is Super Pumped. So, um, one thing as our guests are maybe formulating some of their questions, I thought of a couple, and the first one is we get asked a lot because we run competitions where we give out funding to student startups. And there's a lot of questions, sort of to your point of fake it till you make it, of a lot of times, particularly early stage startups, they don't have a prototype yet. So they're trying to sell this idea that of what they believe their prototype will be able to do, but they haven't tested it yet. And we saw that this was a big problem in the Theranos situation of they could never get the prototype to really work the way it was supposed to. And so, how should entrepreneurs kind of walk that line of this is what we want our product or our service to do, but it hasn't been tested yet? How do they walk that line when talking with potential investors or others?
It's fine to be optimistic, but you've got to be honest. I think you need to think about, okay, what if I'm talking to my parents and I'm a third party and my parents are thinking about investing? How do I want that person to treat my parents? I think it's perfectly fine to say, here's what we envision. Here's what we think is going to happen. We are so excited, but you got to be honest. We haven't been able to do it yet. But look at the team that we've got. Look at these engineers. Look at the experience they've had. Look at the success they've had in other companies. That's all good because you can have investors who are willing to take a flyer on your potential. But don't pretend you've got something real when all you've got is potential.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And also to your point about incrementalism and all of the documentaries that I've watched, and I admit I've been very fascinated by all of these that are coming out right now about these startups and their ethical missteps. It appears that the choice of the first time they sort of make that unethical step is the hardest choice to make. And then they sort of start to convince themselves as they move on that it's actually, sort of okay. And it gets a little, to your point, it gets a little easier every time they do that. And so it sounds like as we have entrepreneurs who are thinking about building their teams and building their culture, that ethics should really be a central part of that, and what the standards are in an ethics standpoint of how they will function in hopes of maybe not putting people in those situations where they're having to make that hard the first choice.
I believe that to be true. You've got the incrementalism part going on, and there's also loss aversion. Once you've told that first lie, you've gone from just, maybe a careless mistake or something like that to, that's actually fraud. I just lied about something. So then all of a sudden, to own up to that, to admit it, means you may lose your reputation as a business person because people now know you're a liar and may not trust you going forward. So once you've told that first lie, just everything compounds. It becomes so much harder to be honest. And again, I think that's where Elizabeth Holmes found herself. I believe that she dropped out of college really wanting to change the world in a good way. And people wanted to be part of that. They wanted to join that. But when it didn't work out the way she wanted to, instead of saying, this is what we hope to do, she started saying, this is what we can do, when they couldn't do that yet. They hadn't mastered it, and yet they told that lie. And then to avoid having to admit the lie and having all the bad stuff that goes with loss aversion come down on them, they had to tell another lie and another lie and another lie. And it just got painful to me near the end of that series to watch the lies that they had to tell to cover up for the lies they had already told.
I know I finished The Dropout over the weekend, and some of those last two episodes, I just, no, don't do it, yelling at my computer screen. And to your point that the ethical dilemmas faced by entrepreneurs are very common, or the same types of ethical dilemmas faced by larger corporations, it would appear that, having these sort of ethical standards would be important as the startups grow into these larger companies. I read the book Empire of Pain about Purdue Pharma and the OxyContin scandal.
Yep.
And when I started it, it was like, so maybe it just went wrong later on. But when you read the book, it seemed that there were some ethically questionable actions from the very beginning of the founding of the company. And so it appears that, to really grow and be successful, ethics is really an important piece that entrepreneurs need to think about, particularly as they grow larger.
And particularly since you've got the precedent now of Elizabeth Holmes probably going to jail, that's not a situation you want to find yourself in. But yeah, one of the quotations I had from, I think, an HBR article just said, you've got to remember that every important decision you make along the way can have really good impact, but can also have really terrible impact if you are lying about it. And so you've got to treat everyone as an important issue from an ethics perspective.
Absolutely. Well, Robert, this has been great. Very fascinating, very helpful to our attendees. I thank you for taking your time and visiting with us today. And to our attendees, I hope you'll join us next week on Tuesday for the final Ignite workshop in this series with David Quintanilla, talking about ethics in action and providing some more insights into how companies have navigated some of these ethical, challenges. So Robert, thank you so much. Everyone, thank you. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
My pleasure. And you probably know David Quintanilla is awesome. He's just a great, great professor.
He's great. We're so excited. And we were so excited to have you join us as well.
My pleasure.
Thank you.